a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, don't understand what meditation is. It's a phenomenal tool, but the reason we meditate is to So welcome to the podcast. The podcast has had a completely new look, new feel, and the other thing that's new is my co-host, Umit. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. What this podcast is now is kind of a dialogue. It's no longer just me speaking on my own. I've met Umit, and some of the things that we've already talked about is completely just mind-blowing in so many different ways. I know you guys are going to really enjoy these conversations. So Umit, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the listeners.
Cool. Well, firstly, Arian, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Umit. Introductions are always challenging because life is so vast and it's hard to kind of condense it into a few minutes, but I'll give it a go. My name is Turkish, so I'm originally Turkish. I moved to the UK when I was 7, and therefore I've kind of got this dual experience. Like, my deep roots are very Turkish, but most of my life has kind of been in the UK as an immigrant, and therefore kind of facing loads of different aspects of, culture, identity, society, kind of also interweaving like very two different cultures together through my experience. I kind of grew up very curious, so I've always had questions around what it is that I am embedded in. What is life, I think, is like the central question that I've asked myself a lot.
It's a good question.
And as a result, I've eventually kind of figured that perhaps like education and learning and philosophy might be able to kind of provide some of those answers. So through, to be honest, a lot of hardship growing up as an immigrant is not easy. I've eventually kind of found myself studying physics. So my kind of educational background is in physics. I've got curious enough to take it to a PhD. So I've got a PhD in particle dark matter physics, but at the same time, I've always kind of been curious about psychology, partially because of my kind of family environment, upbringing, and my personal mental health and the mental health of those around me. So during my PhD, I've got very interested in psychedelics, just because, once again, what is life and what is mind are very kind of, for me at least, very similar kind of aspects or concepts of experience. And through psychedelics, I've also got to explore my own mental health and kind of reality and world. And, I did a lot of therapy to help support with a lot of that exploration. And I've kind of left physics, partially because I felt like academia is somewhat restricting to my own curiosity, and got involved in AI and machine learning. So I'm a data scientist right now, and partially because I've kind of had a glimpse at where the world's moving towards, just kind of on a global level, with climate change and just so much happening.
It's piquing your curiosity.
Absolutely, yeah. And I figured like data science, AI, and ML are potentially going to be quite crucial in that arena, at least. So like my curiosity was around how do you use AI and ML for environmental problems, and how do we solve at a abstracted layer.
So your mentality is towards resolving the big problems, and then you're kind of seeing these big tools and going, okay, so I can see the path of resolving these big problems using these big tools, especially like AI.
Precisely. Or at least a part of me wanted to be involved in that. So I do really love big picture kind of systemic thinking. And
I think that's why we get on so well, because it's exactly the same thing. Like the things that I talk about, that I put out there, is very much the big picture thinking. Again, what is life? That is something that's always interested me. I remember from my childhood, I would always stare at the stars, just constantly looking out there, looking at the moon, being, like sometimes I have to remind myself that the stars are so much further away from the moon. But every time I look up, every time I see the moon and the stars, I think they're just in the sky, but they're not. The moon is right next to us compared to the stars. And it like blows my mind. And I just, from a child, and then I go back into like kind of being distracted by reality, distracted by it. And then one day I'd look up again and like lost and then come back. And then have night awakening and have all this. I was like, oh, that's why I've always been like really interested in that. That's why I've always looked up and constantly, like to the degree where people used to, when we used to come home from just being out, whether I was a child or even as an adult, on my way from leaving the car to the house, I would get caught staring at the moon. I would get caught just staring at the stars. And then either my mother or, when I was older, my partner would be like, "Are you coming in?" I'm like, "Oh," like kind of snap me out of it. I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure. I'll come back into reality." Or better yet, being distracted.
Into your locality.
Into my locality. But yeah, so the really awesome thing about this dynamic is we've both immigrants from the Middle East into the UK at a very kind of around the same age. You did 7, I did 5. And one of the things that really, really drew me to kind of going, yeah, come on the show and let's talk, is your background, your interest in science and the physics. And I think you've touched upon dark matter, and some of the conversations we've had have been very much in that. And I think a lot of people have like this view when you talk about what I talk about, which let's define it as spirituality. And I don't really tend to define it so much as spirituality because it brings this kind of like woo type thing of it, but that's not what I do. I don't necessarily talk in that sense. I don't talk like the mainstream spiritual people. I'm very mechanical with it. I'm like, this is what awareness is. This is what reality is. This is how it works. This is why it works like this. This is the mechanical nature. This is what imagination is. It's a functionality. So my background is I'm a software engineer. So when I started learning, understanding code, understanding functions, understanding how that all works together to then bring something to life, and then I started learning this stuff, I kind of did the same. I was like, oh, that's what that is. Imagination is this functionality. Perspective is this. Perception is this. Like, and it all just made sense. So it's really interesting because none of it is like, oh, science doesn't matter, or science isn't real, or science is like irrelevant. It's not like spirituality and science are separate. I think what the really cool thing about our conversations is going to be is that it will allow us to really build a bridge between the two, to have like the understanding like, oh, well, that's what this is, and that's what this is. And the experiences I've had is very, very away from the 3D, but it's also about the 3D. So it's just really exciting to kind of start this podcast and to be able to have these conversations with you.
Yeah, well, likewise. Yeah, I feel like at my core, I like to hold on to I like to wear the scientific hat because it keeps me grounded in a certain way. However, when you go through like extensive academic research and kind of are on, let's say, the edge of a particular field, your relationship with science definitely changes. Like your relationship with maybe knowledge changes quite a lot because you get to see that like there's information everywhere, and in that web of information, what is genuinely real, or at least in a scientific term, real, what is genuinely provable, and what does prove or being, proving something even mean.
Yeah.
So in particle physics, when you're looking at the microscopic world, proof tends to come through a statistical validity. So we tend to talk about, like 3 sigma, 4 sigma, 5 sigma. And the notion of the sigma is basically you know, if this was to randomly happen, you know, when you're at 5 sigma, it means that the only way you could have seen this is if it was like 1 in a 3 million chance that it randomly occurred. So you kind of give this like statistical significance to what it is that you're observing in relation to the theory that you hold in the back of your mind, right?
Okay.
And you call it a proof when that observation hits 5 sigma. So when the chance of it being some sort of a random flute is 1 in 3 million, you see? And so that's how, well, at least particle physics and a lot of physics tend to work, especially experimental physics. So when you kind of, I suppose, see that reality in that the scientific reality, at least for me, what I've noticed is a lot of these measurements and way of almost like turning our awareness instrument into creating more instruments to help us measure something at a deeper level is framed by the kind of the thought process and the understanding that we're holding in the back of our minds. Do you see what I mean?
I so do, because you're saying things that I've said in a different way. So what I usually say, 2 main things, which is kind of like the 2 things that you've just said, which is I always say, and again, anything that I say is never to slate the scientific community, because I understand the importance of science. I get it. You know, reality, what I've recognized, is more than just 3D. But science is mainly the focus of the 3D. So when I say things like, you know, we're grabbing some bits of 3D to then observe other bits of 3D to then figure out what reality is. But then I'm like, but your reality. So you can observe yourself. And I don't mean the 3D. I mean, go within. The deeper you go, you're observing reality. You are reality. You don't need this piece of reality to then observe this other piece of reality. You're already reality. So like, go in. And then what I realized as well, there was one point when I was on my path of just learning all of this stuff, and obviously there was an awakening, there was opening my mind, there was kind of seeing things differently, and there was a challenge to that, because all my beliefs were, I was like an atheist, kind of like very science driven, or at least the humanities version of science driven way of seeing things. So when you're trying to kind of come out of that, there's going to be loads of parts of you that will make you doubt what you're actually learning. It's like, no, that cannot be. Like, what are you talking about? And that's part of the awakening journey. That's part of all of this. What really helped kind of put that aside for me was the awareness and understanding. I realized one day, I was like, science is essentially, okay, we have to kind of, what is fact? What is, like, not just real, but what is fact? Like, this is matter, or, you know, the speed of sound is this, and what is fact? How can we go, oh, that theory is correct? There is a way that we go, this is true, this is fact. Now humanity have gone, it's this way of doing it, whatever that is, X, Y, Z, or whatever. And if you don't fall into that kind of way of being able to prove something, then it is not true. And then I was like, hang on, that way of going, well, what is true is an idea. It's our best knowledge of what is true based on the limitation of our own knowledge as a species. So I was like, okay, so that doesn't mean that is true. That doesn't mean that that's the only way to measure what is real, what is fact, what is true. And then I realized, and also, you know, that's very focused on specific rules. It's like, well, if this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens, then it's true. It's like, again, that's just based on the limited amount of knowledge we as a human species have. So if I say things like, I talk about magic, a lot of people are like, oh my God, you believe in magic. I'm like, dude, magic is real. And just think about what that means. Like, what is magic? If every person I've asked, like, what is magic? They don't really be able to give me a clear answer. But essentially, magic is something that you cannot explain. Something happens.
So that's your definition of magic?
I think to a degree, yes. I think my definition of magic is something that's happened that you cannot explain. Because once you know how it happens, it's no longer magic.
Right.
So if you and I had a time machine and we took our smartphones and the internet back to the 1500s and showed the people of the 1500s, look, they'll be like, oh my God, that's magic. And
potentially crucify you.
For sure, crucify you. And then they would go, oh, okay. And then we would teach them. Let's say it takes us a month to teach them. Once they learn how that works, it is no longer magic for them. We used to think as humans, it was magic giving birth. To a degree, it is. Once we learn how it all works and everything, it's no longer magic. And that's basically it. So does magic exist? Yes, because anything that's possible in reality is going to be possible in reality. And the only reason you would ever think it's magic is because you don't understand how it works. Once you understand how it works, then it's no longer magic. But then you go, okay, well, humans can't understand it. It's like, well, we might not have the ability right now to understand it, but that doesn't mean it's not real and it doesn't exist. For example, a monkey can drive a car. You go on YouTube, literally type in monkey driving a car, you'll see it. Now, if you try and communicate with that monkey and say, or better yet, if the monkey went to his monkey friends and went, I've just driven a car. And they're like, no, you haven't. Like, no, it did. I just went like this. It had a steering wheel, it had a pedal. Okay, well, how does the combustion engine work? Like, monkey's not going to be able to explain that to you. But you're in the monkey is in the same reality as the car and is using it. And just because you can't explain how it works doesn't mean it doesn't exist. An ant cannot explain rocket science, but they are both in the same reality and they both exist. And this is how I've seen it. Like, just because we might not be able to explain how that's working doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, doesn't mean it's not true. And a lot of people just go, oh, that's magic, and kind of brush it off as, no, that's not real.
So I suppose what I'm picking up on are few threads there, right? It seems like on one side, calling it out and being like, well, magic is real, and being like, okay, the definition of magic is some sort of an unknown mechanism or an unknown process that occurs that is unknown to me from my current perspective. And it's important to know that it's real because is that because you want people to have this, like, hold that possibility in their mind?
Well, yeah, it's yes, but it's not. The answer is not as black and white as that.
Cool. Because
real is so subjective in so many different ways. What's real for me might not be what's real is for you in so many different ways. I talk about reality to the degree where we're operating from multiple dimensions. Our inner world, where you meditate, where you go in, is the fourth and fifth dimension. The fifth dimension is the other part of you, like the extension of God, let's say, if you want to call it source, whatever, your higher self is the extension of that, all operating here. Real changes based on where your focus is. So if your focus is in the 3D, the threat that you see in the 3D or feel is real to you. When you are operating at a higher dimension, the 3D isn't real in that moment. Now, if you're, for example, but it also happens here as well. So for example, what's real for you is going to be different to what's real for me. Let's say you and I are leaving the house and I say to you, oh yeah, we left the house, we closed the door, and then we're just out. And I said to you, did you grab the keys? And let's say For you, because of your experience, you've had a lot of trauma that you were blamed for everything. You had to be like on your game to make sure that everything was perfect, because when it wasn't, your caregivers were really, really angry, very like emotionally unsafe to you. So you have a lot of trauma of blame. And by me simply saying, you got the keys, you think I'm blaming you, and you get triggered to feel that. And you'll be like, no, what you mean? I didn't get the keys. And then I'll be like, dude, what the hell's going on? And we might even get to an argument, and you'll be like, well, you're blaming me. You always blame me. And I'm like, but I'm not. And for me, someone might look at that and go, well, what's the truth? What's real?
Right.
And it's like, but there's two different reals there. For me, I wasn't blaming you. For you, I was. And that's because of the perception that one would have based on what's being said. And this goes to like, again, things like irrational fear, which doesn't exist, because all you communicate, your emotions are all communications all the time. So when you feel that fear, if someone's saying something to you and you perceive that as blame, that's still real, because a part of you still holds that trauma. And if you kind of don't validate that realness, that stress and that trauma will remain in you. That is an unregulated nervous system that will continue going. So in order to resolve that, there has to be an element of validation, and that validation makes it real. So it's such a gray area subject of, what is real based on the individual awareness's experience and what they're going through and where their focus is.
Right. Yeah. So it's tough. So I suppose coming back to my second point, I feel like maybe there's a loop that we want to close here, in that the science loop. Maybe this is where like I've not necessarily like gone off of science or like somehow like look down at it. I feel like perhaps in society or in our collective reality on this planet right now, science was progressively validating some form of a reality, in that it would create an hypothesis and be like, hey, look, we've proved it.
Yeah.
And the way we've proved it is that now you've got lamps, or now you've got electricity and it works in way X and way Y. And we can now somehow, through this, framework of science, get at reality. Right. But I feel like at the same time, perhaps it's kind of overreached in claiming that it's somehow uncovering like some sort of a fundamental truth. It's in that, like, from being a framework, being a tool, it's become like an entire ideology. And I had to kind of almost like undo that like ideological science that's kind of embedded into my mind, my beingness, It's not to say that it's not powerful. It is. It's very powerful. But like, a hammer can be powerful. You don't want to be using it all the time in the ways that it isn't like inappropriate to do so. In that, like, if you don't want to destroy your house, you don't want to be swinging it around in your house, right? So I feel like science in that sense is similar, right? And I agree with you. Like, perhaps like my older naive self felt like science had this power to explain it all, or to kind of tell me what's really true, and I had to go through my kind of process and, doing it the hard way, actually doing the science in and of itself, to realize that actually truth, actuality, reality, these things are, they transcend science, and science alone can't really capture perhaps like the vastness of what it is that it's trying to point at, because it operates from that framework that I was talking about. For instance, like, it tends to assume that everything is in this material reality, and I feel like with maybe quantum mechanics, for instance, like, we've kind of touched the edges of, actually things aren't mechanical. There's there's weird things that can't be explained with pure mechanistic material thinking, you know? So partly why I got really fascinated with science and quantum mechanics is because it starts to kind of erode at this like more classical paradigm of science. And I think there's a lot of things happening in biology right now, and like cell signaling, and you know how organisms and electromagnetism come into organisms themselves, right? And historically, perhaps we would have thought of it much more mechanistically. You know, DNA embeds into proteins, but actually there's so much more going on than we would have previously thought. And I think this to me kind of is what spells out the limitations of science, right? In that it somehow locks in a reality, when in fact the actuality is much vaster than that. So how do you kind of use it, right, in a way where like it does kind of lock in a form of a reality, but you don't get attached to that reality as being true, right? Because it is always, I mean, science is evolving and expanding. So like, you know, no one point or part of science is, you know what I mean? It's like capturing the fullness.
I think that's a great question, and like a great topic to talk about, actually. I told you earlier, just before we started, kind of what I'm going through with the ailments that I've manifested right now, and then what I'm recognizing. So, you know, everything is a manifestation of your let's call it awareness. That is a very broad statement. There's so much more to kind of explain in that, but there's an element of we're all co-creating. So my reality is expanding out of me, your reality is expanding out of you. We are just remoting into these avatars, but we are the focal point. We're the center of our own reality. You know, like when you play Grand Theft Auto, have you ever seen that? When you can go through the level, but the camera is always where your character is, whether it's 3D, whether it's third person perspective or first person perspective. So it's the same with us, our internal world, the 4D and 5D, us, the awareness, you, is kind of like playing that game, and this is your character. Your internal world is what's creating your external world. So your character is part of that creation. You're not, when you meditate and you go within and you're fully engaged with your internal world, whatever that is, it's not the third dimension. That is the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension, depending on where your focus is. So your body is the manifestation of the other dimensional you that you have access to. When you are manifesting something biologically, like some form of disease, you know, or whatever, whether even if it's bloating, you know, it's the manifestation has to work in a certain way. There are ways that our belief system collectively make our reality work. For example, like we can't breathe underwater. So that's one of the ways that this reality works for us. And there are other ways as well. So like if I'm bloated, if my bowels are bloated, let's say, yes, for sure, it can have a huge reason of it's because of what I'm eating. But that me eating it is the manifestation of something else from internal, which is then manifesting the bloated. So it's, again, it could be I'm comfort eating, I'm having really bad food, my body is doing stuff. All of this is a manifestation. And to come back to what you're saying, you know, if you look at it just purely from the point of view of, okay, this element exists physically in the 3D sense, and just kind of address it in that sense, you're not seeing the bigger, like you're not seeing as much of the picture as you would. Whereas having the awareness that it is a manifestation of me. What does that mean? What's it trying to tell me? Why is this like this? What's happening? Because when you have that awareness, you then go to that exploration part as well. That doesn't negate what you would do and we were talking about this earlier, like the hardware, the software. The hardware is my body. It's the 3D. So I would go right now, I'm drinking electrolytes in this water because that really helps my current situation and what I'm going through right now. That's part of it. But that's not the only thing that I'm going to do. And taking the drugs, and whether it's the ibuprofen and things like that, is not the only thing I'm going to do. I've also been going internally to explore why this manifestation is happening. What is going on? What is this? And I recognize, I even told you, it's like I recognize the unconscious anger that had the unconscious fear under it, which was the 5-year-old me that escaped the Iran-Iraq war and came to the UK, that learned that the only way that I can survive is to manage other people's emotional state. And I've recognized that unconsciously in some relationships in my life, I'm still doing that unconsciously. Didn't even know about it. And I'm someone who preaches this shit, so even at that stage, I'm still doing it. It's unconscious. You don't know what you don't know. And I always say that. So by simply understanding that, doing the exercises, the tools that I use, everything, I've instantly felt better. I've instantly started kind of switching all this up. All the elements that I was getting is completely shifting and changing. That doesn't mean you just need to meditate and that's it. And that, it's so much more than that. It's a regulation of the nervous system, which doesn't cause the body to attack the immune system. There's so much more. But what I mean by that, I'm coming back to it, is that there is that understanding, and if by having that understanding that we are creating our minds, not our brain, our minds are actually affecting our body in so many different ways. Everyone, if they had that awareness, they would kind of address any challenge or situation they have in a very different way. They would look at it from that view. And it's the same with reality. Now, I say what I say not because I've read it in a book or, I watched an online course or a YouTube video. I've actually experienced this. I've experienced going to other dimensions. I've experienced stripping back the 3D and seeing what I am. I've experienced the full, clear communication of the universe, which is me. And I felt that to myself. I've experienced this sober. I've experienced it on mushrooms, having weed, having ayahuasca. I've experienced it in many different ways. So when I say what I'm saying, it's because I've had a personal experience in it. And that personal experience has allowed me to see things that I didn't see before. And by having that awareness, I'm able to address life in a way that it feels like I've got more clarity of the picture. I can see things and I'm like, I've got more tools I can use. And like, I've got all of this stuff. Whereas before, if I would have had these issues, I'd have continued feeling trapped like I did years ago when I had like serious IBS, and the hospital actually, they had surgery twice on my lower abdomen. There was nothing there both times, and I eventually got discharged, and it's like, we can't figure it out. But now I have the tools to be able to kind of go, okay, I can also do the hardware stuff, and along with that, the software stuff.
Yeah. So I suppose that shift from seeing everything purely through some sort of a hardware perspective to a point where there is no I myself, there is no like this thing that is genuinely somewhat magical, in that it's like it's behind this body, or it's somehow layered into this body, however you want to see it. I feel like when we think purely hardware-y, we kind of lose a part of ourself, the part of ourself that isn't hardware-y, that's a bit more wavy, like in the ocean, you can see the entire ocean as a collective body, but there are also like waves and ripples and currents, and it's not just this one body.
Yeah.
You know, it's within that one body there is so much happening.
It's interesting. That's the entire reason we meditate. A lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, don't understand what meditation is. And it is a tool, it's a phenomenal tool, but the reason we meditate is for that, is to become familiar with the self, the actual self, because we are all multiple parts within. And you've heard of multiple personality disorder. Yeah. All humans are like that. It's only multiple personality disorder when it's really, really out of control. You have changed many parts since you've been in this house speaking to me. So have I. That's just how we work. And again, when you have that awareness of how you work, you can go like, oh, why does this part of me feel like this? And you can do the exploration. You can be there for yourself. You can soothe yourself. You can integrate. You can regulate. You can actually give yourself what you need and what you're chasing the world for and other people, and you're never getting. That doesn't mean you are all that you need, but you still can. Now, when you meditate, it's to cut out the distractions of reality, to bring your focus out of the 3D and into what you actually are in the 4 and 5D. If you think about it, you have your 5 senses, and your 5 senses is what you use to interact with the 3D reality. So right now, you're hearing what I'm saying, you're looking at me, you're sat down on the couch, you can feel, you're moving around. Now, if you went blind and you lost the sense of sight, all our senses are data, but you would lose that data of sight. So you could still hear me, you could still feel things, you could still taste, but you wouldn't be able to gather the data of the 3D through sight anymore. If you lost your hearing, you wouldn't be able to gather the data of the 3D through hearing anymore. Now, if you lost all 5 senses, you wouldn't be able to interact with the 3D. I could push you around, push your avatar around, and you wouldn't know. You wouldn't understand. But you'd still be here. Or better yet, you'd still be somewhere. You'd still be. You just wouldn't have your senses. That is you as the awareness, the aware you. That's past the identity. So it's not who you are, it's what you are. It's that awareness. The reason we meditate is and we sit down, we don't move, is to take out touch. Is so we don't feel. Is we're trying to stay still, make your body really feel heavy, so you don't move your body, so you don't get distracted by that sense. You close your eyes so you don't get distracted by the sense of sight. You listen to one tone or something guided, so you're not being distracted by all these sounds. You're doing all these things to remove these distractions of the 3D so you can become familiar with what you are, the aware you, the awareness that you are. That is the whole point of meditation.
Yeah. The picture that comes into my mind is that if we're talking about meditation, it's a broad topic, but
Yes.
it's a bit like, and I feel like meditation, self, they're very interconnected. When it comes to senses, it's almost like throwing pebbles or there being mud in the water, and these senses are a way of creating vortices, so therefore it's kind of bringing that mud up and making it harder to see through the water, or making it harder to actually have a clear sight. You see?
I see what you mean.
So when you do, let's say, I don't know, for instance, I've done a 10-day Vipassana retreat, and just observing that process of shutting everything out, no communication, no conversation, minimal food, very routine, but meditating 10 hours a day. What happens is that that cloudiness kind of starts to settle on the ground. And it's not to say that once it's settled on the ground, that's it. You've kind of you've touched upon some sort of an awareness thing. I mean, in the Buddhist tradition, they talk about like samkaras. So these, let's say, aspects of the psyche or things that are embedded within the psyche that then get an opportunity to actually start to come up or to release. In that tradition, that tends to be the way to understand it. In a perhaps more Jungian, Freudian sense, it's things that are in the unconscious that are maybe surfacing.
Yeah, in the shadow.
Yeah, exactly, in the shadow, or people talk about the shadow work.
They're all saying the same thing.
It's very much the same stuff. I mean, it fascinates me to try to even like get a sense of, or to create language around, what that is, what those are, and maybe in modern psychology we talk about traumas, and some folk would talk about traumas being embodied in that, like, they actually plant themselves into aspects of your physical 3D hardware body, right? And this is where I find it really fascinating, in that, like, the 3D physicality and the 4 and 5D that you're talking about actually are all kind of touching one another.
That's really interesting, because trauma is stored in the body. It's stored as energy. But then the concept of energy, what does that mean? What is that?
Well, we can get into it.
I think we should. Definitely do, because like there's a degree where some people, I remember I had this guy come over, and he was repairing something. I think it was the pipes or the bathroom or something like that. And he was kind of asking questions. He's like, what do you do? And, I was talking to him. One of the things I said to him, he was like, I gave him like a crystal. There was this crystal, and I was like, you can have this. He was a really nice guy. And he was just blown away. He was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And he was, why? And I was just talking to him. I was like, all right, so like certain crystals have certain energies and, give off certain frequencies, which then cancel out other frequencies. And I was just explaining it to him like I do. I'm a very mechanical thing. I don't do the woo-woo stuff. I don't go, oh, it's like, I'll explain to you why and how it works. This is how it works. Yeah. And he was just blown away. And then he was like, but how do you know that's true? I said, well, you connect to Wi-Fi, don't you? He said, yeah. It was, that's energy. That's something emitting and that you cannot see. And he was like, oh yeah. And it's the same thing. It's like this thing is emitting energy. You just can't see it. And then we got into this conversation about how many things there are in the 3D that we can't see or touch. Like this is air, but it's a thing. Yeah. It's not like there's nothing here. It's a thing. Like it's actual thing. There's, atmosphere, and there's all these things. So just because we can't see it doesn't mean that it's not here. And then you kind of go, well, it kind of opens up to, do we actually know what the 3D is? Like, are we just saying the 3D is what we can see or measure? Like the third dimension might actually be so much more than we actually have even discovered right now. Is the energy coming from the fourth dimension, or is it in the third dimension, but we can't see it, just the same way as we can't see the Wi-Fi signal or infrared or sonar or something like that. It's like, so that's where I kind of go to when I talk about energy. I'm like, it doesn't mean it's not there. And there are some people that say they can see energy. So, and there are people that have abilities to do, see, hear things that everyone doesn't. I myself have increased my ability to hear what people call the other side or my higher self, like your gut feeling. But I literally sometimes have full-blown conversations with me as my higher self, completely sober. Now, when I do any psychedelics, it's like I've taken the headphones out and I can clearly hear the universe just talking to me. Right. It's as clear as day. But it's always there. It's just in one state at one time I've not been able to, but now I can. So it's like, when I wasn't able to, it didn't mean that it wasn't there.
Mm.
And it's the same with like any sort of energy, because everything is energy.
Yeah. What is life? What is energy? What is matter? These are all kind of super interrelated, and things that I've questioned for a very, 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 very long time, and many times, in that whenever I revisit these questions, I kind of almost like hit on new like landscapes of discovery. Like it's almost like my current self has a much larger, broader understanding or grasp of my felt, lived, experienced reality, such that maybe I can have some sort of an answer that is slightly better than the answer I might have given you maybe like 5 years ago, right? In pure physics terms, one of the like core equations of physics is Einstein's equation of E equals mc squared, right? Energy is equal to mass, so mass that we can measure, in our kitchen, like a kilogram of flour or whatever, right? Times c squared, meaning that it's c times c times m, right? And the c represents the speed of light. So we actually see this in the lab, in that, for instance, like you can have like an electron and its antiparticle, a positron, right? And these things have real mass in the way that we would measure them, right? Very, very, very minute amounts of, 0.00000 amounts of kilograms or grams, right? But what happens is when the positron and the antipositron come in contact, all of their 3D properties, things such as like charge and spin and various other terms that like we would use in particle physics, kind of like cancel out, and the particle nature, the actual physical nature of them, disappears, and they turn into photons. So they basically convert from being mass beings to photon beings, and they start traveling at the speed of light, right? Because photons are light bits, right? So the amount of energy that's created is, I suppose, in the E equals mc squared sense, would be, you take the c squared over to the other side, right? The amount of energy created would be E equals the amount of electrons times c squared, right? So that equation is essentially saying like energy and matter are interchangeable, and the way they interchange and like how you do the ratios is with speed of light squared, right? So that's the correction factor, right? And what's really happening is like you can do it the other way around too. You can create electrons from photons, from pure, energy that travels at the speed of light, with particle physics or with the instruments of particle physics, and create matter, right? And matter doesn't travel at the speed of light. Matter slows down. Matter, like, we travel at certain speeds, and particles can travel at certain speeds, and you can give a particle more and more and more speeds, but it never can touch the speed of light. It always travels slower than the speed of light.
Interesting.
So in a pure, I suppose, like physics sense, like they're literally they're the same thing. It's just that when energy, like, or electromagnetism converts into matter, there are new properties. So like properties of charge, like, positive, negative charge, or, they start carrying what we would call, they start interacting with physicality through force carriers. So like, how do two electrons know that they're close together? In particle physics, you'd be like, well, there's a force carrier between them, and it's a virtual particle. So photons would be like, I don't know, bouncing back and forward, or they'll somehow know that the other electron is there because of this force carrier, right? And when you're sitting here and not falling through this couch, it's not because you're like all solid, actually you're almost all empty space, but you're not falling through. And that's because there are force carriers that are communicating from your matter to the matter of the sofa and being like, hey, we can't fall through one another because like we acknowledge that we're here, and in the way we acknowledge, we hold one another up. Does that kind of capture like the way you would see it, at least in a pure physics sense?
It does. It's really interesting as well. And I've got a follow-up question. And is that why because I've heard, obviously, and by the way, my physics knowledge is minute. Like,
that's cool.
I know stuff and I've learned stuff, but realistically, I don't know anything about physics, you know. So I've heard that the reason like I'm not falling through this couch is because we're vibrating at a different frequency. If I was vibrating at the same frequency as the couch, I would go through, which is also kind of what Flash uses as his power to walk through walls and stuff. He even says, he's like, it's a scientific thing where he changes his vibration to match with the wall, and he's able to go through it like that. Does that play a role in anything that you're saying?
I mean, ultimately, it's tough. So when we look at it from pure physics, it wouldn't be the way to see it. Like at the same time, though, like when you look at the roots of quantum mechanics, you know, you have this. Eventually, when you look so deeply, right, particles start to behave weirdly, you know. So for instance, you can have an electron actually tunnel across a wall, let's say, right? And that is part of quantum mechanics, in that the electron can somehow spontaneously disappear and appear on the other side of the wall, right? So at these like minute levels, like quantum mechanics becomes weird and fuzzy, right? So there's that aspect of quantum mechanics, right? And maybe it touches upon this like vibrational thing that you're talking to. And there's also this other aspect of quantum mechanics where, you know, there's this thing called the double slit experiment, where you have these two slits, right? And you're shooting or like pointing electrons in the direction of these two slits, right? And in a pure mechanical thinking, right, or seeing the universe in a pure mechanical sense and thinking that these electrons are physical matter, on the other side, like when it's hitting that screen, you should only have like these two strips, right? But when we do this experiment in the lab with electrons and with even larger like bodies, like chemicals, what you see is an interference pattern. You know, imagine if you actually had two waves hitting those slits, right? What happens is some parts of those waves will kind of like come together and go larger, and other parts will cancel out. And what you would see is like some sort of a core middle where like all of the waves are kind of like pointing to, and then slits on either sides, kind of almost like going like on, off, on, off, on, off. And you see the same pattern with electrons, right? So in a way, so this is called the wave particle duality, in that somehow at the quantum mechanical level, things are both particle and wave. So
that's interesting.
So it's fascinating. And usually quantum mechanical effects, as we would call it, becomes less and less the more matter you have. So like you and I don't just magically like quantum tunnel through this wall, you know, because somehow there's this thing that quantum mechanics would call decoherence, in that like when you have heat or like things that are interacting with the system, it becomes more particle. Like in that double slit experiment sense, if physicists try to peek at, you know, is the electron going through slit A or slit B, the electron starts to behave like a particle. So you only start seeing two slits. The moment you start to like observe it, you collapse its wave nature. So
Interesting. And this is
so I think that touches up on perhaps like partially what you were trying to get at
well,
with
actually,
the vibration.
I think what has always been interesting, because again, how you described it was much better than what I knew about it. Everything that I've known about it was very, very little. But I always related it to rendering. What you have described just now and just before I asked that question, when you were saying these things, what was coming to me was rendering.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I always talk about we are rendering our reality. And I believe that the speed of the render is the speed of light. That's why the matter that we are can never exceed the speed of the render. We can never kind of beat the rendering speed. To my knowledge right now,
some sort of like a frame, what is it called? Like a frame rate?
Yeah, exactly that. And this is where we kind of talk about time. And time is, and this is a much larger conversation and we'll have it, but time is the fuel that changes that frame rate. The speed of that change in that frame rate is actually the render speed, which is light. This is how I see it, and from my understanding. And it really it is that. Now how it behaves, have you ever seen you hear if a tree falls in the woods, would anyone hear it? And for me the answer is no, because I am creating my reality, but I'm also co-creating with others. Right now you and I are co-creating everything that we see, these microphones, the wall, the books, even the kind outside and what we can kind of see. But right now upstairs, to a degree, is not rendered. The road that we know is over there is not rendered. The other side of the world is not rendered until we are observing it.
And you would say therefore it currently doesn't exist.
Again, going back to what's real and what exists. To a degree, no and yes, because it exists because I can go and interact with it, but at the same time it doesn't exist because the observer is not observing it. The whole concept of reality existing requires an observer to validate the existence of it. So and that's where I come back to as well. So in my reality is not just this room, it's the entire universe. And if I go to upstairs, then that exists. If I go speak to someone else, that other awareness exists, things like that. And as I'm doing that, it's rendering, but it's rendering at such a high rate and high speed that it just seems like it's it's all here.
It's there.
It's all there. Yeah.
Right.
And we always say we always see the past because light bounces off you, then goes into my eye. So there's a degree, there's a moment where I'm not seeing everything at the exact moment it's happening. The light is back. So that's again,
slight lag.
It's like the render, and this is the speed.
Right.
It's just so fast for us. It's like, instantly happening.
Yeah. So, I mean, Einstein, in a sense, kind of, one of the core axioms of general relativity is that, speed of light is kind of the ultimate speed. Like nothing can move faster than the speed of light in the universe. And like if you had, let's say, if you were on a train and the train was going at, I don't know, like 100 miles an hour, and you held some sort of a light, you'd be like, oh, well, now this light must be going at, the speed of light plus 100 miles an hour, but it doesn't work that way.
No.
So
it's relative.
General relativity becomes really, really strange when you look into like time dilation and so on and so forth. But it is called relativity in that everything kind of in this reality is relative. Yeah. And that relativity perhaps is at least like the speed at which things can be relative. The maximum speed is the speed of light. Now, I don't know how that translates back to what you were just saying earlier.
I think it's relative to who, and this is what I mean by
precisely.
It's relative to the observer,
or to what?
Well, the observer. The
Right.
who is the identity of the observer. The what is the observer. So it's relative to the observer. That's why the person on the train holding the light is having a completely different experience of speed and things like that than the person observing the train going past.
Precisely.
You know, and that experiment where the like what angle you're observing from as well. You know, if you and I are looking at the Andromeda galaxy, and then I walk over there, I see it 2 days after you see it. So it's like the speed of light. Again, it kind of changes relative to you versus relative to me. And this is where I feel like maybe, again, all these conversations in science can really have a boost up, is to have that awareness that we are all having different experiences of reality. And I this is just me speaking, by the way. I don't have the answer. I'm just kind of suggesting this to be like, I think it would really, really help in the sense of, you know, we are all having a different reality experience. Therefore, that's why it's different in terms of relative to this awareness versus that awareness, depending on what experience we're having, whether it's the experience of being on a train or the experience of watching the train go by.
Yeah. I suppose in my mind, we maybe the word reality doesn't necessarily capture the intricacy of what we're talking about, in that it kind of wraps into itself multiple layers, right? And I tend to use reality in terms of that relative experience. So in that sense, I think we definitely agree. And maybe like actuality or truth as kind of this higher layer, I don't know, you know, experience where it's not relative, you know, it's and I don't know, perhaps once again, right? Like it's a framework, it's the way in which I think about it. But I tend to, even with truth, when we're talking about truth, I have an idea of relative truth, in that like truth can be in relation to one another. You know, I could be like, hey, well, currently you are sitting in front of me and you are closed, you know? And in a sense, this is true, but it's not some sort of a grand actuality, you know, it's just a relative truth in the framework of the way we as two human beings interrelate and understand sitting and standing and being dressed or undressed. Do you see what I mean? So it's a relative truth, but like from the perspective of the t-shirt having its own experience, like
well, this goes back to my previous example, and it's exactly the same. You know, when I said, well, if we go out and I go, oh, did you get the keys? My truth is different to your truth relative to each other. In terms of if the t-shirt is having an experience as well, from my understanding, yes, because if you think about source being the whole, God, existence, reality, universe, it's all one. And the experience, because it's me. So if I am everything, as God, as reality, as source, and I am me and I am you, and I am the table and I am the, you know, it's all experience. There's knowledge and experience, and I'll get into that in a bit. But the experience of because this is awareness, this is consciousness. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say that because so many people call it different things.
Yeah, I suppose the fact that you can touch it, it can touch you.
Yeah, so it's having an experience through my awareness.
Well, its existence, I suppose, occurs or appears in your awareness.
Yes, but it's also having its experience through my awareness because I am it.
Right.
And it is me.
I see.
So, yes and no. This is why I always say a lot of people have this kind of definitive way of thinking. It's not this or that. It's this and that. And that goes back to really how I help people with their internal world of recognizing that you are multiple parts, because you'll become one part and then go continuing the example as I gave earlier. Like if I say, hey, have you got the keys, for someone who might go, what? Like you're blaming me and feel blamed. And then they have that conversation as like, dude, I wasn't blaming you at all. That person might think, oh, I'm crazy. I feel like I'm just being blamed when I'm not. But that's not true. So it's not, oh, you weren't being blamed, is you weren't being blamed and you felt like you were being blamed. And so that reality exists and that reality exists. Like they both exist. It's just, that's more data for you then at that stage. It's more data for you to go, oh, okay, well, why was I feeling like this? Why was I even experiencing this? Why was this my reality? But what people tend to do is have this definitive kind of black and white way of thinking, and they'll have that conversation, oh, he wasn't blaming me, so I just need to ignore that. Every time it comes up, I need to ignore that. And that's it. You're just stopping that. You're stopping the exploration. You're stopping the growth. You're stopping that part of you that's coming out from the shadow to be integrated, to be able to regulate your nervous system, to be able to reduce the stress that you're unconsciously in throughout your life. You're not able to do that because of that way of thinking. And I carry that way of thinking with everything, with every single thing in reality. It's not just this, it's this, and it's this. So the way that you're describing how the particles behave and, you know, the photons and everything like that is also like what's happening. But that doesn't mean that it's not also a render, or it's not expanding out of you. And this is a conversation that a lot of people.
Well, we could get into, I suppose, what exactly you mean by expanding out of you at some point.
I think we should, and I think we should definitely do that. I think we're at a really, really decent time now, and I think we should talk about that in the next episode. So I think let's just, I think we'll stop it there. We have hit the hour mark. So thank you everyone for watching, for listening. Again, this is going to be the type of conversations, and we're going to talk about so many other things. If you have any suggestions, or if you've got your own ideas, we've talked about some really, really cool stuff. Definitely please comment, you know, post about it, reach out to us both. Both of our social medias and contact information are going to be in the description of this episode, so please reach out. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is our first kind of ever episode together, so we're still kind of feeling the landscape that we're kind of carving. So I realize we've touched upon quite a lot in this episode, and perhaps at some points I myself felt like, well, where is this going? Where are we going? And I feel like that arc will probably like start to become a lot more clearer and a lot more concise as we do more of this and potentially get more feedback.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really excited about where it's going to go. This is one of the reasons why I was excited about doing this, because it can literally go anywhere, and I love that. So
there's both, like, it's like both a curse and you know,
but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah,
it's a great problem to have. Okay, well, thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.